Perfect. Thanks, Abhishek, and a warm welcome to all of you. Thanks for taking your time on a Saturday afternoon to be part of this. So I'm going to quickly dive into the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to comment on the YouTube channel, and we can take the questions towards the end. You can give me questions anything to do with marketing or digital, or even in general for. So I think this is a question that many companies, brands, organizations are figuring out: is what do you do during, and also definitely what do you do post the pandemic, and how do you really take a business forward? So the first question really that comes to mind is, when will this pandemic end? And I think, if you look at even the best case scenario, Taiwan was probably one of the first countries to be able to kind of stabilize it, and they took almost 3.5 months to get out of it, because they started understanding this virus in early January, even before China could actually, take it seriously. And we're already seeing that while China had said that they had already figured it out, they're now having a second wave that's coming in, and there's probably going to be a third wave as well as you start opening up and as you start, letting people go outside and interact. So, and I think there's obviously a lot of research, there's a lot of projections, there's a lot of, universities out there trying to figure out what will it take, hospitals trying to figure out, governments trying to figure out, and most of them seem to come to the conclusion that it's going to take in between 12 to 18 months from when it started. So, till January 2021 to maybe June, July 2021 is when, this effect is probably going to stay. But, when you really look around, we actually don't know, because it can be that the cure comes in sooner. It can be that the vaccine, gets created and distributed in the next few months. But what is very clear is that it is going to last us for a few more months for sure. And that's definitely a reality that all of us should be aware of and should keep in mind when we're looking at marketing and business, and definitely keep in mind as you also get out there and get a job for yourself in the near future. And what's obviously evident is that the longer this extends, the more job cuts are going to be there as well. And I think that's obviously going to be different for different industries. So if you could see the chart here, construction or hotels, hospitality, travel, some of those industries are going to be more massively hit vis-a-vis some others which may not really get too impacted. For example, communication might actually not get impacted that much, telecommunication. So there will be different industries that get impacted differently because of this. And I think, it is very important to kind of look at what is really happening with many of the venture capital firms and PE firms as well. In fact, SoftBank themselves came out about 10 days back admitting that almost 15 of their companies might not survive. And that just means that there are going to be a lot more companies out there that may not be able to survive. And they may not just be startups. In fact, we're also hearing many large companies who already had a bad year coming for them. And now they are in a situation where it's going to be really, really challenging for them to survive. But there is obviously some good news and great news for us and everyone in India. I think from what the IMF has projected, India and China may be the only two countries that actually might just grow this year. Of course, it all depends on how well we tackle with COVID and how we come out of it. But India is still one of the countries that is probably at the forefront of being able to grow as an economy. And I think as we're thinking more about marketing and digital as well, I think one fundamental thing we're telling clients that we work with and brands that we work with is that you will need to change your business model before you can start marketing yourselves again, because the world we used to live in January and February 2020 is not going to be the same world that we come out when we actually get over with COVID. And this is again a great quote from Rahm Emanuel, who is Obama's chief of staff, is that, and this is something he mentioned in 2008 when the entire recession happened, is that when you have a big crisis, that's actually a great opportunity to do something that you couldn't do before. It is an opportunity for you to accelerate some of the things that you were ideating about. It's a great reason to also pivot your model and pivot your business to whatever it needs to be in the future. And that's actually what many companies are today starting to figure out as well. And we're also seeing that there are fundamental changes that are happening in people's lives and in people's behavior. And that's definitely going to impact what they buy, how they buy, which brand do they trust. And that's definitely going to continue even after the COVID is sort of, settled down. Be it depression, be it anxiousness, be it the uncertainty, be it the focus on safety and hygiene. Travel is going to be a huge challenge, right? So be it leisure travel, business travel, it's all going to change. And there's going to be a huge adoption of, work from home, huge adoption for sort of digital workplaces and being able to interact and, learn virtually. So there's going to be a lot of fundamental shifts. I think we're still grappling with what those shifts might be, but this is a quick list of 10 of those shifts that we are trying to kind of figure out. And that's something to, again, keep in mind for companies and brands as they start figuring out what to do. And I think, some of these characteristics are going to impact certain industries very differently, which means, for example, having large gatherings is not something that's going to happen, at least in 2020, which means anyone who is in the meeting space, exhibitions, events, weddings, will need to fundamentally relook at what that means, right? Or be it, for example, hygiene. And I think I was reading something interesting around salons and barbers and salons and all the beauty salons. They're going to have a huge challenge with regards to safety and hygiene because you are so close to the person who's giving you that service that it becomes fundamentally impossible for them to have social distancing when they're giving you the service or when they're cutting your hair or when they're giving you a service at a salon. So many of these industries will need to fundamentally relook at how do they sanitize their place, how do they relook at all of that. So many of these characteristics that I showed in the previous slide will actually impact different industries differently. And that's something, again, that businesses are trying to grapple with in a fast basis. And there will be a lot of second and third order changes as well. That means it's not just the first order changes that will happen. You will have other changes that will happen as well. For example, this is actually a graph of when there's been a large drop of electricity and emission across the world, and it's always tied to a crisis. But as a repercussion of this, there are other things that get impacted as well. We are already seeing oil at all-time lows. And that also means that things like electric vehicles are probably going to take a backseat now because oil is not expensive. It's very, very cheap. And there will be second and third order changes that we still don't know, which we really need to keep track of and see what's going to happen in the coming months and coming years. And just taking a sample industry, for example, real estate, it's going to be massively hit. There's already inventory of 3.7 lakh crores that's available in India at the moment. And on an average, they sell only about a lakh of crore of inventory every year. That means they already have about 3.5 years worth of inventory already lying. And there's a lot of projects that are still in the making and under development. And are people actively going to be buying properties in this year and next year? And that's something that a lot of developers are not very optimistic about, which means there's going to be a huge delay in this revenue coming into these developers and fundamentally altering their margins and businesses as well. And we're seeing some fundamental shifts. We're seeing some shifts, and these are, of course, observations from our side. We yet to see whether it's actually going to happen, but we are seeing that a lot of companies and businesses are realizing that just-in-time models go for a toss when you have a crisis like this. So many companies that don't have, let's say, for example, even a car, you can't make a car even if you don't have a single part. And many of these parts come from different parts of the world, and they come just in time so you can manufacture your products. And that means that there is going to be a shift there with a lot of them, storing those products, getting those products ahead of time, and hence there'll be an increase in warehousing. And that's a great way for a real estate player to relook at their assets and say, hey, there is going to be a decline in offline retail in the coming years, especially because of this shift. Can I relook at moving that space to becoming a warehouse and, rehashing that asset to make it a warehouse? We're all obviously seeing that digital first businesses are already having an edge today, right? If you look at the top apps that have been downloaded and used in the, in the lockdown period, there's a lot of it for consumer apps and e-commerce apps. And that is something that's definitely going to continue. And in fact, as per the Retail Association of India, almost 25% of, retailers might just go out of business. And I think, this is actually especially true of retailers who have franchisee outlets, because, they also need to rely on their franchisor to actually give them the products, which is going to be even more difficult keeping the pandemic in mind. And the second part is, are people going to flock to malls and buy these products? That's again, I think lot to be seen in the coming months. And so what we're really telling a lot of businesses today is that if there is a way for you to make your business or service or product digital first, then there's never been a better time. This is the time to accelerate your e-commerce. This is the time to accelerate the digital angle to your business. For example, we work with a play school chain, and we're working with them to now figure out how do you make that model at home, right? How do you send a box of activities that parents can do with their kids? How can you have virtual sessions? How can you have collaborative learning virtually, even if it's a small child? And I think, that's the level at which many of these businesses need to rethink, because for a play school, one, right now they're shut. And even when they open, are parents going to be comfortable to send their kids to a play school? I think it remains to be seen, but most projections say that may not happen because of multiple reasons again. So I think digital is going to play a huge role. With whatever we're seeing also is that each country is now going to focus on their economy and their country. And that means the entire Make in India, which obviously was picking up, is going to see a huge surge now with a lot of local production happening. And over time, we will see a decreased reliance on imports where possible, with the government actually subsidizing companies to manufacture both products, services locally as well. And international leisure travel, for example, is a huge space that's going to go through a surge. We're already seeing airlines declaring bankruptcy, and that's going to extend even further with many other airlines coming to that fold. But what we are, estimating is that people still need to travel. People still need to go out there and take a break. And I'm sure all of you would love to take a break once the COVID situation improves. And that means the domestic leisure travel is a business that's still going to stay and going to grow. And again, if you are in the travel space, how do you pivot to make this change happen is going to be really, really important. And we are seeing that countries that have a huge reliance on international tourism and tourists is going to go through a shift. And you can already see this chart from Thailand tourism, which shows how January till December, January, they had great, momentum. But then from February and March onwards, it's zero, right? And the entire country is reliant on foreign tourists to make that grow. And that these are countries that are going to have a huge challenge when they don't have these tourists coming into their country. So we're already seeing that domestic travel is becoming a focus. Australia, in fact, launched the campaign earlier this month to Australians saying, hey, as you start planning your travel for rest of 2020 and 2021, see Australia first. Look at Australia. There's so much to do in Australia, and urging travelers to look at that. And And it's definitely an angle that India is probably going to look at as well once the situation improves. I spoke about this a bit earlier as well, that digital transformation is going to be key to most businesses. Automation, work from home, how do you collaborate remotely, how do you work remotely, how do you track performance remotely? And as business travel declines, a lot of it is going to be virtual and business meetings, business deals, and that's going to fundamentally shift because of digital transformation. So one of the things we're also helping clients with is, how do you build your digital workplace? How do you really, integrate all of this to make it happen? And some of them already have some of these pieces. They probably already have a CRM in place. They probably have, some. They either have Microsoft 365 or the G Suite, or they already have some of these in place. How do you bring all of that together to make it more seamless for your team to work together, or even with your clients? And of course, that's when we also launched Digigrad, which Abhishek spoke about earlier. And one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar is also that digital is going to be a skill that all of us will need. And there are multiple, obviously, programs out there. There are free programs and paid programs, and hope you will consider us as well when you do want to pick up the skill. And the biggest shift that we're probably going to see is health and safety, right? And there is going to be a huge impact of health and safety in every industry, be it food, be it travel, be it, even a grocery store. And for example, we took an industry like mobility and said, how will health and safety impact mobility? In fact, shared mobility is going to be a huge challenge. Would you want to sit in a cab with 3 other strangers without knowing whether they have COVID or not? Would you be fine to rent a bike without knowing where was the bike before you rented it out? So these are fundamental shifts that are going to happen in shared mobility. And this is my personal opinion, is that there will actually be a marginal increase in personal transportation because of this. So there will be more and more people who want their own personal vehicles because they want to get there safely and come back. And this is again something that, we've been hearing from many of the venture capital firms, the PE firms, that there's going to be a lot of innovation. There's going to be a lot of new startups that will come up. And the question really, to ask is, would you walk into a restaurant the 4th of May, which is officially when the lockdown is likely to, open up as per the government, but in reality, it might extend. But let's assume it is something that's open up 4th. Would you walk into the restaurant, or would you rather order from an app which actually shows you the temperature of the chef who's preparing your food and whether that chef has COVID or not? And I think that's the level of innovation that many of these companies are going to go through as they relook at what's going to happen to fundamental industries like food and dining and others. And the other part of health and safety is also insurance. And I think insurance is again something that's going to do really, really well in the coming months and years because of this entire COVID situation. And this is a great example of Wimbledon actually having the right insurance and got 141 million from that because of the pandemic. And on the flip side, if you look at, for example, BCCI did not have a pandemic insurance, and they were going to lose a lot of money because IPL is not happening. And that's again something that will fundamentally be relooked at by businesses to look at whether they have enough insurance cover for continuity and business continuity. And we are seeing that this innovation adaptation is already starting to happen. In fact, Amazon has now come and said that we will do testing for Corona and we will scale it up, right? And because they came and said, we anyway need to make this happen for our team members and employees. Why can't we just take it to public and actually make it happen at scale to the public as well? So they are now going to start delivering this healthcare service, which probably was not something that they would ever thought of in the past. So, that's really what, the first part of my presentation is that before you start looking at marketing, I think each business is going to go through a fundamental shift, and there will be a business model change for many businesses. And that's really what the first thing that many brands and businesses need to really look at. The second part of my presentation, which is focus towards how do you market to this new normal, right? Because there is a new normal that's coming in with how we are behaving, what we are doing. We are working from home. Our entire behavior is changing, and that's really what's really going to be what we call the new normal. So, how do you market to this new normal? So what we're really saying is that you need to have a growth mindset and really assess the impact for your own business, right? You need to figure out what are the negatives that are going to impact you and what are the positives that are going to impact your industry and business, and then accordingly develop a strategy, and of course then go offensive and have a growth mindset to make it happen. And this is again something we're really helping a lot of brands and companies with, is to do scenario planning and do scenario planning with different levels of revenue and different levels of cost, right? Because you don't know what your revenue is going to look like for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months, or maybe for the rest of the year. So what are the different scenarios in which for example, your revenue is really, really low and your cost is not changing much? So how is that going to really work out for you, right? So what are the things you need to do to bring down cost, or what are the things you need to do to up your revenue as a business? The other way to look at it is depending on which industry you are and what kind of curve you are going to see in terms of impact. There are fundamentally, 3 curves at most. This is actually a great study by Board of Innovation. You can check it out, boardofinnovation.com. They built a strategy matrix that shows that most businesses will have either the V curve, which is they'll have a huge drop and then they'll come back to where they were, which is probably 6 to 7 months of rebound. And many businesses will be in the U curve, where they will dip down, they will stay there for some time and then come back up. And the most pessimistic view is that there'll be an L curve, which is you basically dip and then you stay there for some time before you really come back up. And I think different industries, like we were discussing earlier, will get impacted differently, which means you need to be able to figure out where do you fall into this matrix and decide what your future is going to look like in terms of marketing and business. And the other way to also look at it is how do you define your brand strategy with a more structured approach to making this happen? And be it in terms of speaking to the heart and being engaging with the users. You need to also relook at whether if you are a offline focused business, let's say you're a retail, let's say you're a salon chain, let's say you are a chain of cinema theaters, you are fundamentally offline, right? And you will need to relook at what that brick and mortar strategy should be for the future. Or even to map calendar moments for the next 6 months and see where do you really want to engage. Do you see shifts in consumer behavior that you can make it happen? And of course, don't dismiss digital, because many brands today still rely a lot on offline, still rely a lot on outdoor, still rely a lot on other mediums, but they will all need to start taking digital a lot more seriously now. And I think that shift is going to be long-term, because all of us consumers are sitting at home, working from home, doing what we do. More of us are cooking. Lots of different shifts are happening, and that shift is going to stay for some time as well. And I think what brands need to really, really remember is that the purchases in the future are going to depend a lot on the consumer's disposable income and whether they are certain about their future and certain about the lifestyle that they want to really continue living. And that's going to be a shift in, even if you are loyal to a brand, you may just let it go because you don't know whether you have a certain salary outflow or other incomes. And that means for many consumers, they will need to bucket themselves saying, okay, what are the things I really need today as essentials to make it happen? What is it that's a treat? So let's say I want to order a brownie, it's a treat. What is it it's an indulgence? Buying a new phone is an indulgence. What is it that I can postpone? What is it that I don't really need right now? I can even buy it after 6 months or 1 year. It should be okay. For example, cars might be one of those items. Expendables. What is it that's unjustified at this point? And this is the category, for example, where a lot of jewelry brands and luxury brands are going to face, is that you will still have your very, very high net worth individuals who will still buy whatever they want. But your second set of consumers and third set of consumers will say, hey, this is an unnecessary spend. I don't need to spend on luxury goods right now. And that means really that you will need to relook at, is your product or category in the essential category, trade category, postponables, expendables, and for what kind of consumers, right? Because there will be some consumers who don't care at all, right? Which is the last category you see, which is the live for today category, where they have a huge financial stability. COVID is not going to impact that. They're going to live their lives almost the same way that they were living earlier, right? But as you go up the ladder, you'll realize that there will be people who are finding it really hard, and they will stamp their brakes on many expenses, and that's really going to hurt a lot of brands across the segment. And you need to figure out how do you move up to make all these consumers your customers of your brand. And obviously, there are specific strategies for each of them as well that you can see here. And I think, that's really, it's a pretty detailed slide. So if some of you want to come back to it and look at the recording, you can have a look. But it really gives a strategy of what should you do, right from shrinking your packaging sizes to maybe starting a new brand if you think it makes sense to, because if you're a premium brand, would you want to remain a premium brand, or do you want a brand which is more affordable, which will help you sail through the next 12 to 18 months? So there are different strategies out here that can really make sense. And, we're really working with brands to figure out where do you fit in right now and what strategies would really make sense for you and your brand and for your company. The other approach is also in terms of managing marketing investments, because what we're really realizing is that customers are going to be less brand loyal right now and more price sensitive. And that means you will need to look at which channel of yours is really giving you results, and then shut off everything else, because at the end of the day, even for you, cash is king as a brand, and you will need to find places where it's making sense and where it's not. The second is assessing opportunities, because you will need to figure out where is your core customer in this bucket that I showed. Where is your customer, and how can you maintain relevance to your core customers? And that's going to be really, really important as well. You will need to also find those scenario plannings that we discussed earlier and figure out, are you going to be able to survive in the long run? Are you going to need some different products? Are you going to need different services to make this happen? And also reassess, how are your customers switching brands? How is the value for them redefined, right? A value for a restaurant go today may be redefined by safety, and that might not be a focus earlier. And finally, you need to balance your communication budget and see, how can you measure, especially when it comes to digital and other mediums. And I think these are specific examples of what we did with some of the brands. For example, offers is going to be the key, right? Because, and in fact, I was surprised that when the iPhone earlier this month released a communication, this was the first time the iPhone spoke about price, right? They said you can get more for less. They have never focused on price, but you can realize when a brand like iPhone is focusing on price and not really on how amazing the phone is, then you know that all brands need to really look at that and do it. And especially if you're a luxury brand, a premium brand, many of them are relooking and saying, okay, do we need, if as a business, if we need to survive, do we also need a sub brand or a different brand with affordable offering to make sense right now? The other thing we're also telling brands is that don't use this opportunity to cut corners or cut costs when it comes to product quality, right? You don't want to reduce the quality of your product or service, but use this time to actually bolster trust and bring in trust rather than cutting corners. And also focus on what's important to our customers, identify new product segments if there are, and there will be many as we come out of COVID, different needs that arise. And that's definitely going to be something for many brands to really look at. And because there's going to be a growth in online, there's going to be also a focus from offline to online, right from the OTT channels like Amazon to Netflix and others. Some of them still don't have advertising, but for example, Hotstar or Z5 or Voot already have it. You already have TikTok is in fact now the #1 social media channel, overtaking Facebook. So how do you really utilize some of the newer channels that are driving the growth and use online to grow your brand? So I'm really quickly going to summarize and then take in questions that you guys might have on the YouTube chat. I think the first step we're really telling brands is that be prepared for the pandemic to continue for some time. It's not going to get done on 3rd of May. It is going to continue. A lot of companies are going to take hard calls, and even we have had to, and many of other companies will have to as well. Take that call. You have to. These are tough times. But the great part is India is going to grow, and you will need to find a way to pivot your model, to adapt your model, and keeping in mind health, safety, and digital transformation, and make it digital first. So that's definitely something that many businesses will need to do. You will need to do scenario planning to make sure that you are, optimistic, but you're prepared for the worst. And how do you make that happen? And understand the recession psychology that we spoke about, and see how you can tailor your tactics, tailor your products, tailor your pricing and packaging to it. And finally, you have to go offensive, become digital, and really go out there and act on it. And that's really how you're going to survive in the next 12 to 18 months from now, right? So with that, I'm going to take a quick pause and take questions from, from the chat here. If you still have questions, feel free to kind of, put it out here. So I think Shreya has a, first question on, do you think there will be a major shift in the manufacturing belt with countries boycotting trade with China? Definitely, yes. I think there will be a shift, but that shift is not going to be quick because the challenge is China's manufacturing capability is not something you can replicate in a single quarter or even in 2-3 quarters, right? Some of these are fundamental capabilities that need to be built, but there will be a shift, and that's already something that even from the Indian government standpoint, you can already see that happening. And I think the next 12 to 18 months will really define how that will shift, not just for India, but even other countries as well. And China is going to be in a challenging situation in the coming years. We have a question from Shivani on what effect do you see on the cold chain industry, and will we see a shift more towards point of production, that is farms, or towards cities, keeping in mind increasing home deliveries of groceries? That's a great question, Shivani. I'm not an expert at transportation and cold chains, but from what little I know is that there are already companies like Ninja Cart and others who are redefining farm to home. And you will see a lot more of those kind of companies getting into it, even for cold chain as well. And I think, is it going to get closer to consumers? Definitely, yes, with more and more consumers wanting organic food, fresh food, better meat, fresher meat. All of that is going to shift in terms of how the cold chain industry works. And definitely, there are companies already trying this out. So it's not something new. In fact, Ninja Cart, from what I can understand, is actually one of the few players in Karnataka that's still able to get the products and supply it in the market more than anybody else can, more than even what Big Basket can. And that's really the power of many of these digital first companies that are leveraging technology to make this happen. We have a next question from Yashwardhan on how do you think consulting is going to be affected by the pandemic? Will clients require them more than usual, or are they going to lose revenue? I think, Yashwardhan, it's going to be a double-edged sword there. I think there will be a lot of large companies that will want more consulting. But at the same time, there will be companies that will go solvent. There will be companies that will, not make it through the crisis, and those could have been potential clients for the consulting companies. So I think it's going to be at both spectrums. But consulting and strategic advice is probably, never been a better time to get that today, right? And I think all your larger firms like McKinsey, Bain, and BCG are continue to, in my view, will continue to grow. They will have work. They will have large companies wanting them to figure out how to pivot, how to change the business model, how to be digital first. And I think a lot of that is still going to continue. Mayank has a question on should a brand compromise on their positioning, which has taken years to develop, for affordability, which may only last for a year or two? That's a great question, Mayank, and I think that's why we are also recommending customers that if your brand stands for something, don't change the course, stay true to it. But if that brand is not going to do well, you should probably look at a new brand and extend your portfolio to make that happen, right? You should be able to extend your portfolio to other products and services and possibly a new brand or a sub brand that could target a different kind of consumer. But your point is right that a brand should stay true to who they are. And that's definitely something that's going to be relevant even during the pandemic as well. Sushant has a question. What are your views on the Indian auto industry? Provided a drop in sales last year and norms like BS6 and EV. I think the auto industry is going to go through a turmoil in the short term and medium term. But I think in the long term, with shared mobility becoming a challenge, personal mobility, in my view, is going to continue to grow. I think it is something that will grow. But I think the next 6 to 12 months are going to be challenging for them because they're not going to be able to manufacture it. They're not going to be able to kind of, sell it as well because people are not on the roads. People are all at home. And in worst case scenarios, if the pandemic continues, let's say till September, October, November 2020, then many of these companies will need to fundamentally alter their production capacities and how much they manufacture. So I think in the short term, medium term, there is a lot of pain that they need to go through. In specific for electric vehicles, I think electric vehicles were picking up in terms of affordability and also in terms of features and technology. But I think because of whatever was happening with COVID, actually that might take a backseat now. With a lot of capex being cut down, with a lot of investments being cut down, many auto players that were planning to invest this year or next year in building the EV capability might not do that. So you might actually see the EV piece being extended out by a few more years. And actually the rate of acceleration that we might have seen without COVID would have been better, but you will see some shifts there for the electric vehicles as well. Yashwardhan has an interesting question. What's going to be the best industry to be in the coming times? Frankly, very hard to say, I think. But what we are saying is that any business that's digital first is definitely going to be key. And that could be in any industry, right? You could be a digital first company, like Urban Clap. You could be a digital first company like Big Basket, which is pure play, e-commerce, retail. But you could also find that there are innovations that are happening on a digital first business, even for industries that we might not have imagined. And that's something that we get to see. But definitely many of the fintech companies are going to do, some of the fintech companies will do well, not all fintech companies, because some of these fintech companies also link to retail transactions, which may not happen. So I think there will be certain kind of industries who are digital first and who are able to leverage the digital first economy, who are actually going to succeed from this, if that makes sense. Pranav has probably a question that's on everyone's mind, which is how do you see placements of colleges altering and what courses will better equip the students to perform better? I think placements for anyone who got placed, who is supposed to join in May, June, July 2020, is going to have a challenge as well because many companies are deferring their joining dates. I think that's going to be a challenge, and that's also going to impact the next batch as well. So I think, my recommendation there would be, and being an entrepreneur, I would say, it's probably probably a good time to look at entrepreneurship and say, how do I really start something? I know there are incubators that will help you with that, because many of you might have EMIs to pay off, but there are incubators that will help you with some amount of financial stability to make that happen. So that's definitely one quick recommendation there. But I think it is going to be a challenging year for anyone who's out there and getting placed across any B school. And you guys are probably in a much better position because you are from a better institute. But imagine the long tail of B schools which are out there; they will have a much more challenging time. In terms of courses, I think I don't think anyone is prepared for COVID. So, are there courses that will help you be prepared for a pandemic or a crisis like this? It's very hard. And I think what these programs really need to try and do is to help build in critical thinking, which can then be applied to any scenario. And that's really the fundamental base that I would say that be important in the future. But I don't think there are specific courses per se that really help. Of course, things that are going to shift, for example, digital or automation or even machine learning, some of those areas are important to start learning. And I think those again could be great areas to kind of pick up and learn as well. I think that's all the questions we have for now. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. I think we do have a feedback form. If you would like to fill that up, it'll be great to get your feedback and inputs. If not, feel free to write into us as well. Thanks so much for joining us today, and have a great weekend ahead.